Every generation produces its legends, musicians who get called the greatest, revolutionary, iconic, words so overused they've practically lost meaning. But there's one name that keeps rising above the noise, decade after decade, genre after genre.
You know you should be glad.
More records sold than almost anyone in history. Songs still studied in university courses. A catalog so influential that entire genres borrowed from it without even realizing. And yet, is any of that actually proof they were good? Or is this just the greatest marketing story pop culture has ever told itself? Today, we're not just celebrating the Beatles. We're investigating them, stripping away the mythology to ask a simple, slightly dangerous question. How good were the Beatles, actually? Four kids from Liverpool: John Lennon, sharp-tongued and restless; Paul McCartney, melodic and endlessly ambitious; George Harrison, quiet but relentlessly curious; and Ringo Starr, the steady heartbeat who joined last and somehow made everything click. They cut their teeth playing marathon sets in Hamburg's clubs, refined their sound in the cramped basement of Liverpool's Cavern Club, and by the early 1960s, they weren't just popular, they were causing scenes, riots practically, screaming fans, sold-out arenas, a phenomenon the press didn't even have a proper word for yet. But raw popularity fades. History is full of bands that dominated the charts for a year or two and then vanished. What makes the Beatles different is what they did after the screaming started, and that's the thesis of this documentary.
Get back, Loretta.
The Beatles weren't extraordinary simply because they sold records. They were extraordinary because they never stopped reinventing what popular music could be, and in doing so, they shaped nearly every generation of musicians that followed. Let's find out if that claim actually holds up.
Get back to where you once. You know what I mean.
Before the fame, there was the grind. In Hamburg, the band reportedly played sets lasting many hours a night, sometimes for weeks on end. It's the kind of trial by fire that either breaks a band or forges one. For the Beatles, it did the latter, turning four amateur musicians into a tight, road-hardened unit long before most of the world had heard their name. Their early albums, Please Please Me, with the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, weren't groundbreaking in structure. They were rooted in rock and roll, skiffle, and American Motown and girl group influences. But what set them apart was execution. Tight vocal harmonies, an ear for hooks, and a chemistry between Lennon and McCartney that was already producing songs sharper than most of their contemporaries.
But this boy.
The Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership is often treated as legend, but the mechanics were fairly simple. Two writers with different instincts pushing each other. Lennon leaned raw and direct. McCartney leaned melodic and polished. Alone, each had limitations. Together, they covered each other's blind spots. Arguably the single biggest reason the band's writing accelerated so quickly. This wasn't innovation yet. It was mastery of the form that came before them. The innovation was coming.
Thank you.
Beatlemania is usually remembered as noise, an image of screaming teenagers drowning out the music itself. And that image isn't wrong, but it undersells what was actually happening. Their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show is often cited as a turning point for American youth culture, drawing one of the largest television audiences up to that point. That kind of instant, mass, transatlantic reach was largely unprecedented for a rock band. But the deeper story is why it connected. The Beatles arrived at a cultural pressure point. A generation of young people, especially in post-war Britain and America, looking for something that felt like theirs. not their parents' music, not manufactured pop. The Beatles offered charisma without pretension. They were funny in interviews, visually distinct, and unmistakably young. That combination, genuine musical skill plus a magnetic public persona, is rare. Plenty of bands have had one or the other. Few have had both at this scale. Beatlemania also rewired celebrity culture itself. The template of frenzied fandom, wall-to-wall media coverage, and merchandising that we now take for granted in pop stardom largely traces back to this moment.
This boy wants you back again. Strawberry fields forever.
By 1966, the Beatles made a decision that could have ended their career. They stopped touring. Live shows had become nearly unlistenable over the noise of screaming crowds, and the band wanted to focus on something else entirely, the studio itself as an instrument.
I disagree. Let me.
What followed was one of the most rapid creative evolutions in popular music history. Rubber Soul brought more introspective songwriting. Revolver pushed into tape loops, backwards recording, and Indian instrumentation. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is widely credited with popularizing the concept album and treating a full-length record as a unified artistic statement rather than a collection of singles.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad.
None of this happened in isolation. Producer George Martin's contributions, orchestral arrangements, unconventional recording techniques, classical training the band lacked, were essential. It's fair to call Martin a genuine creative partner, sometimes referred to as the fifth Beatle. But the ideas driving the experimentation, the willingness to break from formula, consistently came from the band itself. By the time of the White Album and Abbey Road, the band was working across an enormous stylistic range: hard rock, folk, avant-garde collage, music hall pastiche, proto-metal, often within a single record. Whether or not you love every experiment, the ambition itself changed what listeners came to expect from a pop album. Before this era, few mainstream acts treated an LP as a canvas rather than a product. Here's where the myth deserves real scrutiny. Were the Beatles actually skilled musicians, or just charismatic songwriters with a great producer? John Lennon was never the technical showman. His rhythm guitar work was solid rather than flashy, but his real instrument was his voice. Raw, emotionally direct, capable of both aggression and vulnerability, often within the same song. His songwriting leaned toward brutal honesty, later expanding into political and deeply personal territory. Paul McCartney is frequently underrated as an instrumentalist. His bass lines were melodic rather than merely rhythmic, functioning almost as a second lead line, a style that influenced generations of bass players. He was also the band's most versatile multi-instrumentalist, moving between piano, guitar, and drums, with a vocal range that could shift from tender ballads to screaming rock and roll. George Harrison is often called the Quiet Beatle, and for years his songwriting was overshadowed by Lennon-McCartney. But his lead guitar work was consistently tasteful and melodic rather than showy, and his introduction of Indian classical instrumentation, particularly the sitar, expanded the band's palette in ways that influenced psychedelic and world music-infused rock for years afterward. Ringo Starr's reputation as merely adequate has softened considerably over time. Musicians and drummers have increasingly praised his feel and restraint, his ability to serve the song rather than show off, and his distinctive, slightly behind-the-beat groove that became one of the band's secret weapons. Individually, none of the Beatles were the most technically dazzling musician of their era, but collectively, their strengths complemented each other almost perfectly, which is arguably a rarer and more valuable trait than raw virtuosity. If there's one area where the Beatles' reputation is hardest to dispute, it's songwriting. Lennon-McCartney is routinely ranked among the most productive and influential songwriting partnerships in modern music, and George Harrison developed from a minor contributor into a genuinely major songwriter by the band's final years. Striking is the trajectory. Their early work dealt largely in straightforward love songs. By the mid to late 1960s, they were writing about isolation, mortality, disillusionment, spirituality, and social change, often within melodies still catchy enough for mainstream radio. That combination of accessibility and depth is a difficult balance, and it's one reason their catalog aged so differently than many of their contemporaries. Their influence on songwriting technique, unconventional chord progressions, unexpected structural shifts, genre blending within a single track, shows up across decades of artists who followed, from arena rock to indie singer-songwriters.
Words of wisdom, let it be.
Beyond the music, the Beatles' fingerprints are on nearly every corner of 1960s culture. Their haircuts alone triggered a global fashion trend. Their evolving looks, from matching suits to psychedelic, countercultural style, mirrored and helped shape the decade's broader shifts in youth identity.
But though they may be parted, there is still a chance that
The cover art for Sgt. Pepper's is frequently cited as a landmark moment for album art as a serious visual medium. Some of their promotional films are considered early precursors to the modern music video format.
one thing I can tell you is you got to be free.
Their embrace of Eastern spirituality, experimentation with psychedelics, and eventual outspokenness on social and political issues placed them at the center of the countercultural movement, not as passive symbols, but as active participants shaping its direction.
No, his knee. Hold you in.
By the end of the decade, the Beatles weren't just a band people listened to, they were a lens through which an entire era understood itself.
He got walrus gumboot. He got
No honest documentary can ignore the criticisms, and there are real ones. Some of their earliest material sounds, understandably, dated. Simple love songs typical of the era's pop landscape, offering little that separates them from other acts of the time beyond execution. Some of their later experimental tracks divide listeners even today. Not every avant-garde detour landed, and a few tracks are more admired for ambition than actually enjoyed. The band's later years were marked by real internal conflict, creative disagreements, business disputes, and personal tensions that eventually led to their breakup in 1970.
What could it be, Paul? Something.
Some critics argue this late-period friction occasionally shows up in the music itself, with albums that feel more like 4 solo projects stitched together than a unified band effort. There's also a fair question about nostalgia. Do we rate the Beatles as highly as we do, partly because of when they arrived, a uniquely disruptive cultural moment, rather than purely on musical merit alone? It's a reasonable critique, and one worth taking seriously rather than dismissing. But these criticisms don't erase the achievements. They add texture. A flawless myth is boring. A brilliant, occasionally messy, genuinely human band is far more interesting and far more believable.
Don't let me down.
Plenty of massively popular acts fade from relevance once their era ends. The Beatles didn't. Each new generation seems to rediscover them, sometimes through parents' record collections, sometimes through documentaries, sometimes simply through streaming algorithms surfacing decades-old songs to first-time listeners. Their fingerprints are visible across an enormous range of later genres. The melodic ambition of arena pop, the guitar interplay of Britpop bands who openly modeled themselves on the band, psychedelic revival scenes, and countless singer-songwriters who cite their compositional approach as foundational.
It's a love that lasts forever.
Remastered reissues, documentaries, and streaming re-releases have consistently reintroduced the catalog to younger audiences, keeping the band commercially and culturally active more than half a century after their breakup, a longevity very few artists in any genre have matched.
So we sailed unto the sun.
The Beatles were not simply one of the most commercially successful bands in history. That part of the story is almost the least interesting thing about them. What actually justifies the legend is this: they fundamentally expanded what popular music was allowed to be, as an art form, as a studio craft, and as a cultural force.
We all live in a yellow submarine.
Their songwriting evolved from simple pop formula into genuinely sophisticated composition. Their studio innovation redefined what an album could sound like and how it could be made. Their musicianship, while not individually flashy, combined into a rare collective chemistry.
Yellow submarine, yellow submarine.
Their cultural influence reshaped fashion, art, and youth identity far beyond music itself, and their longevity, still selling, still streaming, still influencing new artists, remains almost unmatched. No single Beatle would likely be remembered today as an all-time great on talent alone. But together, something happened that was genuinely larger than the sum of its parts.
Yellow submarine, yellow submarine.
Four distinct sensibilities interlocking at exactly the right cultural moment, pushing each other toward reinvention again and again. The Beatles didn't just dominate pop history, they rewrote its rules. More than half a century later, artists are still chasing ideas they introduced, proving that their greatest achievement wasn't simply making timeless music, but forever changing what popular music could become.